language is so important for all of us, right? Some of us have to see that language to understand and to communicate it to the rest of the world. For some of us, maybe we cannot see that language. And our next speaker probably will highlight those areas of what communication and visibility and language can mean for her. Let's welcome Nidhi Goyal.
I think I'm a little lost after listening to two incredible journeys to speak about something that I like to speak about, I think has a deep linkage around mental health and disability. Let me start. So unlike the others, I do not have a piece of art to exhibit right now, but I'll try the art of storytelling. I remember that evening, my colleague and I, we were in Varanasi, coming back from a training that we conducted at the outskirts of Varanasi with a group of young women with disabilities. And both of us, generally very, very chatty women, have a lot of opinions, a lot of things to talk about, trainers who like to debrief. That evening just sat back in our respective rooms. Although we had adjoining doors, we left it open, but we wouldn't talk. We wouldn't talk because the day was particularly hard. It brought to us the interactions with the young women with disabilities in that institution or associated with that institution, brought back to us some of the hopelessness, some of the fears, some of where the questions of how, when, where the change will happen. We were at this training, and we generally begin with this whole thing about, just as an icebreaker, talking to women with disabilities about, tell us one dream that you have. It could be a simple dream like, oh, I want to own such and such outfit, or I want to eat such and such thing, to I want to travel the world, to I want to have a career. And very often, we find it challenging just because women with disabilities refuse to have a dream. And we often wonder as trainers, and we know at an intellectual level why this is and what's the complexity around it. That day, there was this one particular young woman who was dragging herself within the institution, waist downwards. In her words, her body did not work. And she was sitting there, we were all sitting on the floor, when we were talking about tell us a dream. And she said, I do not have a dream. And she was very angry about it. And so in our fun way and our coaxing way, and as trainers do in our own annoying trainer way, we said, but there must be something. And in that region, with a lot of conversations on marriage, about women having to, and they're 16, 17, and 18 years of age. And you can have all the child marriage acts, but at 15, 16, you're already getting really old to get married. And so we were talking to her and we said, Are, listen, do you have a boyfriend? So she gave us some very ugly stares because why are we talking like city people? And then I said, don't you want to get married? And then the quality of the silence changed. And we thought, as pathetic, annoying trainers as we are, we said, let's probe this. And we said, okay, what happened, da-da-da-da-da. And she said, no, I do not want to get married. Do you get it? I said, it's fine, but why is there an anger in saying so? And she said, because it's shameful as a woman whose waist downward does not work to get married. And I said, why? And she said, because I do not want to be lifted by my groom when we're taking the fairas. It's public shame and embarrassment. We had to unpack a little bit on that. We continued that day, little by little, trying to impart some hope, trying to shift a little bit of that mindset. But that moment took me back into a space, into a movie that I had seen as a little girl. And I call myself a little girl because I still call myself young in my 30s. So that film was a film that, have you guys heard of this cult called Bollywood? It's Delhi, of course you have. So there was this film where the heroine loses her legs and then refuses to be a burden on the hero, so pretends that she's like this bitchy woman who left him and walked away in spite of all the love. Has someone identified the film yet? Man. And it brought me back to Man. And I asked her, While my co-trainer was unpacking some of the realities for her, I said, wait, just stop. Have you watched Man? And she was shocked. She said, "Aapko kaise pata? How do you know?" And I said, "Kyunki kisi zamane mein maine bhi Man dekhi thi." As a trainer, as a woman with a disability, as an activist working on disability rights, the journey is immensely difficult. It's difficult because you're dealing with first the trauma that inaccessibilities, that mindsets, that stereotypes, that stigma bring to your own lives. And then you have to pause. You have to overcome that. You have to normalize that depending on situations. And you do all of this. You do a range of things as a coping mechanism. You do normalize some of the stigma. If people say, oh, someone's looking at you, and I'm like, it's okay, you know, I'm worth looking at, it's fine. If someone stares, if someone, you know, behaves incorrectly, if someone is not respecting beyond a point, I would object, but to a certain extent, it normalizes. And so you cope through all of that as a woman with a disability yourself. Then you move into this space where 30 women in front of you are living the same battle of the stereotype, the stigma, and nobody's there to pause and say, this is impacting your mental health. This is impacting your self-worth. This is impacting the way you look at things. This is impacting your beliefs. And so you live through their trauma, your trauma once more. It doesn't happen every space because it's like, you know, you would then say, why wouldn't a surgeon detach from their patients? And a trainer does, but the trainer also has to bring a lot of empathy. The trainer also has to bring a lot of frustration, anger, fight on behalf or with the people they're working. And so the loop of the trauma continues. And where does the loop break? I've often heard of, oh, there's collective healing in training, but I think there's also regurgitating collective trauma when you're a trainer, when you're a woman with a disability. And these were the moments that transport me back. It doesn't happen very often, did happen that day. I also believe because of the multiple other things that I was working on. At that point in life, when this day happened in Varanasi, where women were hopeless, where they thought there was no dream, where they believed that they were not made for relationships, where they were forced to believe that they were a burden in their families, where they were not given opportunities and discriminated, the idea was also that on the other hand, I went into my room and I had to write up a report and put down narratives of women with disabilities who had been raped, who had been gang raped, who the justice system said, you're mad and we wouldn't believe your testimony. And what happens to mental health when you're in this space of being angry on behalf of someone, being upset with the system, where you want to fight, where it's not okay to keep quiet, when you're pushed back suddenly in one moment of vulnerability into your past, where you were a little teenage girl trying to cope with the acquired blindness that you had. And that brought me back to where I started. I started at 14 or 15, and people want me to pin my exact age, which I can never do. I remember it was 2 days before my history exam because I hated history, and the minute I found out about my eye disorder, I thought, chalo, ab fail hue to koi bahana to mil gaya. So I think, you know, when I was told that I'm going to be losing my sight, I have a progressive degenerative eye disorder, I really did not know what's going to happen with me next. I knew, you know, life is possible because I had a brother who was successfully living his life, but I didn't know what were the range of challenges as a woman, as a disabled woman, as a second child in you know, sibling of 3 siblings, what would happen to me, what would happen to the family. And so I think I always say this, that the more I started losing sight, the more I started seeing clearly the inaccessibilities around me, the barriers, the problems, the infrastructure or the lack thereof, the mindsets which isolated you. And I think Hardeep spoke so beautifully about isolation. What happens to when constantly people tell you you're not good enough? Have you heard of that island where to kill a tree, people just stand around it and curse it? Somebody has heard that? Yes? Many of you, all are very like murmuring. I'm blind, you don't have to like visibly make actions, you have to speak. So, oh, I wasn't speaking in the mic till now. So, it's a little bit of that with people with disabilities, that the world around you sits back, laughs, probably, you know, pops a couple of popcorns in their mouths while they're saying, you cannot do this. You are a burden. You are a problem. You're defective. You're not the norm. This is not for you. And I could battle some of that in the beginning, although I really feel I should have gone to a child counselor or an adult counselor, whatever I needed at that point. I still feel I survived that. I survived acquiring my blindness. I took a couple of years, but I survived it because I had a stellar, unshakable support system. And that made me reflect and think and sit back and say, what happens to the women like me, to the people like me who do not have this support system in their lives? And that's the day I took a vow that I would create this support system for other people like me and women like me. But then I zoomed forward into when I took this vow, and I didn't know what I would do with this oath. But I said I have to make a career, right? Now I was painting for 10 years and I'm now blind. I wouldn't be able to paint anymore. It's okay. Just a dream that I'd harbored and worked towards for 10 years of my life was taken away. I thought of the time when I wanted to do this media course in my post-graduation. So I already had a master's, I had a postgraduate diploma, and then I was still not content. And I said, I want to do mass media. And I remember my first day, I was called 2 days before to the college, where I sat down and literally my butt had hit the chair. And the head of the department said, hypothetically, if we assume you can never, ever, ever, ever get admission in this course, how do you think you can manage? Wait, let me tell you a minute. You have so much of baggage of your disability that people in this course are really competitive and they don't have the time for your baggage, or to help you with your baggage, or to carry your baggage forward. Anyway, it's a visual course. I don't think you not being able to see is going to help you make films or click pictures or get into advertising or conceptualizing or any of that. How are you going to roam the streets of Mumbai? I don't think it's possible. But hypothetically, if you get into the course. And that day, the journey of hypothetically, you will not be able to do this, began. And it began not just through the professors, it began through the classmates. I remember I had to do the first role play about a strong woman leader. Who knew then that I would run a leadership course for other people like me? But then we had to do a role play, which I scripted for my group mates. And one of them called after a long discussion with the others saying, listen, we're not comfortable with you being a narrator. We don't think you can really, we're not sure if you can speak. And I'm like, listen, I'm blind. I don't have a problem with speaking. They were like, no, but why don't you rehearse it on the phone with me a couple of times and then I can assure the others. And this was just the beginning of the journey of derogation, of lack of support. So much so that if you ask me today, how was your course? I'll be like, yeah, cool. Because I've repressed it so much. It took me a couple of years to even speak about it. Except 2 or 3 supportive people. I had most of and I'll give you one of the examples. If I did something well in one class, the entire staff room knew about it, saying, oh, that Goyal, she could speak in class. I'm like, again, I am blind. But I had incidents where people would cut the queue and think I'm blind, so I wouldn't know that somebody's crossing me over to take the photocopy 10 minutes before me in the exams. Teachers would pride and say, oh, this Goyal, no, she does not take any special help. She manages everything on her own. We give her these old photocopy notes, she gets them typed up, and she writes the exam, and she takes permissions from the board. What happened to reasonable accommodation? What happened to level playing field? And all through, when I wanted to give up and get out of the shitty environment, I remember telling myself, I'm the first disabled student this mass media course has ever accepted, and if I don't perform well, I will be the last. And that kind of pressure is not just on me. It's on most people with disabilities. They live with this performance of, if this pressure of perform or perish. And perform to excel, not just perform to be average. And what happens when we are trying to make people with disabilities or add such an extra pressure of independence, such an extra pressure of performance on them, which is inhuman? Then we come up with titles like Divyang and call them superhuman because we have superhuman expectations from them. And circling back and weaving through, when a disabled person has to do all of this, and when I say I had a supportive family, what does it mean? You think disability only touches the individual's lives? I'm not proud, nor am I ashamed. I don't know how I feel, but I can say that I added at least 10 or 15 years more of stress to my parents' lives. And I see that in their early aging. But they're proud parents who've aged early, happy and contented that they could create an enabling environment while leaving me with a sense of joy, a sense of hesitation, a sense of anger again. The joy because I was fortunate to have parents like these. The sense of hesitation because I want to reflect and be like, did my disability cause this? Did my disability cause this? And then the anger because the disability did not cause it. The disabling environment did. People's mindsets did. The kind of trauma which we don't have to live, experience with a disability, but which is created through the external environment, that caused this. It causes us to be these champions and stand up and say, hey, I don't need help, even when we do. Or they say, oh, disabled people should be independent. I said, but the society is interdependent, but we have to prove all the time. And I think that anger, and just to leave on a last note, to think about these loops again and again. I was locked up in a lounge. I'm a frequent traveler today. I'm an activist who's also, in what my friends say, a globetrotter, and I say I just live on aeroplanes. But I was flying back from Mexico from a meeting, and I remember my halt was in Germany, and they locked me up in a lounge. And I say they locked me up because they took my passport and boarding card to keep a check on when my flight would be. Then they refused to provide me assistance to meet a friend. I had a Schengen visa, and she was waiting outside, a German friend of mine, with hot breakfast. They refused to assist me outside. I said, okay, can I please, it's around the corner, there's a cafe. I've come from a 13-hour flight. I'm a vegetarian. Can I please buy food? Can you just walk with me 15 steps? They refused. I said, can I walk 15 steps and come back? They refused. I said, let me speak to your superior. They refused. I said, please talk to me. They refused. And I was there in a lounge all by myself with this woman who pretended, or probably did not speak English, who refused to look at me, who refused to respond to me, as if I was speaking something that was nonsensical, as if I was asking for too much. And then she was talking to people, and I said, let me talk to your superior, let me talk. I pleaded, I requested, I begged, and then I wanted to snatch the phone, and I got angry, and I wanted to break her desk because I was hungry, and I was dying, and I was really, really not really dying, but dying of hunger, frustrated that nobody would respond, and I was a frequent traveler, and they weren't respecting my choices. And I still felt very annoyed, and I wanted to react. And then I looked around and I said, I'm isolated here. And I sat down, I gave up. And that's the day I realized how people with chronic mental illnesses, psychosocial disabilities, mental health conditions feel when they're locked up in institutions. I at least knew that at the end of 7 hours, I will have an out or I will make a run for it. But there are people who don't have options because we do not understand their language. We create a disabling environment. We do not have the empathy to build that kind of support where they could function, where they could decide. And then we say, who are you to choose for yourself? And this is a statement that's often told to people like me. When at the airport, assistants suddenly decide that it's a narrow way, so they hold me by my waist and drag me, and I yell at them. And the porter says, Madam, ladies hai, itna chillao mat, kamar se hi to pakda hai. And I said, Bhai sahab, आप जाके क्या जेंट्स को किधर से भी पकड़ेंगे क्या? But the idea is that you're disabled. You don't get to decide. You don't get to choose. And you still need to smile. You still need to be independent because somehow we want you to be inspiring, superhuman, Divyang for all of us. Thank you.